exciting because for all the Disney fans out there and people, even people who aren't Disney fans, there's this like, she did what? She moved next to Disney and how often did she go? So let's just back way up. Why did you all decide to move your family right next to Disney World?
Well, we were living just outside of Denver at the time. We had our youngest was one, and then our two. So we have three kids. Our oldest was trying to think. I think she was in third grade or maybe second grade, and then a first grade boy, and then our 1 year old. And so I had, just after I had our youngest, Lily, I had terrible postpartum depression and anxiety. And it just like, oh, just threw my world into just a loop. And so for that whole first year of her life, I was like trying to just get back into life and find myself again, really. This is the first time I'd ever experienced any depression or anything like that. And so I was just trying to find myself. And so we're basically, John, my husband, was like, hey, why don't we plan a trip to Disney World? Because we'd been before. If you've ever been, it brings just like so much happiness and joy. And so I remember we were down at his computer in his office. And so we were searching and like figuring out days and times. And he's like, how long do you want to go? And I said, well, at least 4 days, one for each park. And he's like, okay. And he's like, okay, well, maybe we could go at least 5 and then have a day in between because, your feet are killing you by the time. So we could have rest day. And I was like, well, how about if we went 2 weeks and then we could like really just see the Orlando area and, take our time and just really inundate. And then he stopped and he's like, wouldn't it be cool if we just lived there and then we could go anytime we wanted?
And most people at that point are like, ha ha ha, that would be fun. And they're like, okay, back to the trip. But you kept down the path.
We kept going. So when we were first married, John and I lived in Orlando because he was going to school there. And so we had season passes to Universal. And so we knew like how inexpensive compared to just visiting it is just to get like a Florida resident annual pass. And how fun it is just to go whenever you want. And so when he said that, I just knew in my heart, like, that's what I wanted to do. That's what I needed to do. And John is so supportive. And I mean, he obviously would follow me to the moon and back. And he was just like, okay, let's do it. So from that time on, we just decided, okay, we packed everything in a storage unit in just outside of Denver. We decided just to move there with our suitcases, and John, my husband, is a sound engineer and music producer. So he drove the car with his music gear and his kind of portable studio, and we all flew, and we left. We did it.
And that means moving schools for the kids?
Yes, yes. So we had our kids. They were younger, so we'd lived in Austin before, and so they went to Madeline our oldest went to kindergarten in Austin. Then we moved to Denver and she did first grade, and then our son started kindergarten. So they were kind of like okay with moving schools, and they were so young. So us, like, we didn't even really think about the school thing. We're just like, oh, they're fine. They're going to be by Disney World. They can handle it.
Right. That does make a bad day at school better. I would,
Yeah.
yes. I want to talk about postpartum, but let's do that after we finish this conversation, because I don't want to lose the magic and go back, and because I suffered with it as well. And
Okay.
if you have never had that, it's a real thing and it's dark, but let's get there. We'll get there in a minute, because other people I'm sure listening are either in that or know someone who has, or likely will be someday. So you moved to Disney World, and how often do you go? Because I would think that there's this potential problem that you go too much, or suddenly you don't love it anymore, because it's sort of an everyday thing. It's like going to the grocery store.
Yeah, we were wondering if that would happen, and it did eventually happen. So it took 2 years for it to happen for us. But once we got our annual passes, we would go as a family. We would go at least once a week. And then in between, like John and I would go for date night, or I would take Lily, who wasn't in school yet, during the day, or I'd go by myself, or I'd go with my friends. So total, we were probably there at the parks in the beginning, probably 3 times a week. And then it kind of tapers. Like you're like, okay, you kind of have your fill. And so then it would be like about 1 time a week. And then people would come visit, and so we'd go often. So I would say on average, we were there at least once a week.
Wow. And
Yeah.
and for folks that only go on vacation, I imagine that they're thinking, my goodness, that must have been expensive. So I realized you had the annual pass, which makes the
Yes.
cost of tickets cheaper. But I love Disney. I was there. My husband and I went by ourselves for the first time since we've had our kids, so 20
Uh-huh.
some years. We just the two of us went in November. And
Mhm.
and it's a totally different experience to go just adults than kids and all of that. But
Yes.
nothing there is cheap.
No.
So how did you food, drinks, did you get around that to make it more affordable, or were you like, we're living here, let's go crazy?
We totally went around and made it terribly affordable. So I would, if I went with Lily for the day, I would pack snacks for her, and she would eat her snacks. So like actually I remember one time she loved green, like cut up peppers, like bell peppers. So I put some in a sack, and we were standing in line to see one of the characters, and she asked me, she's like, "Can I have my peppers?" And I pulled it out and gave her, and the people behind me were like, "Oh, they're actually peppers." I'm like, "Yes, they are." So we brought our own snacks most of the time. And then every once in a while we would eat there. But it would just be like a quick service thing. So, or we'd get treats or something like that. I mean, we could go for like an hour and it wasn't a big deal, or we could go for 3 hours. So, like, we could go in between meals. So it wasn't like we were stuck at the parks to eat. And then where we live, so we lived in the cutest little town of Windermere. And if you're looking at a map, it's just right north of the Magic Kingdom. So we would go in, it's like kind of almost a back secret passageway to the Disney property. So on the way there, there's really like no fast food in Windermere, but there's a McDonald's. And so we would oftentimes, if we were at the park, the kids would get hungry and we're like, well, we're gonna go home. And like we would always swing by McDonald's, and you could like see the Magic Kingdom fireworks from that McDonald's and stuff. So that was just kind of like we did it definitely on a budget, and made it work. And the kids still had so much fun. And yeah, so if you don't have to spend the money, like you really, or you don't have to spend the money if you don't want to.
So what's your favorite ride?
Oh, that's a good one. I love thrill and that sort of thing. So probably like Space Mountain. Um, if you go to the right, there's two ways you can go to Space Mountain. I like the right one. Um,
See, and that's so
ah,
interesting because when you go often enough, you have these little things. Do this,
yes.
don't do that, where you figure out how to navigate it in a way that you can avoid the amateur Disney folks who don't know what they're doing and stand in the wrong lines and waste all the
Yes,
time and slow everything up. So I'm sure that you have all sorts of secrets.
we really do. I mean, we know all the back ways to get to places, all of the shorts, the shortcuts, the tips. Yeah. I mean, we literally knew it like the back of our hands. It was not okay, let's look on a map and see how to get there. It was my kids, John and I, we just knew it all.